it was an additional about $20,000 to $25,000 a year that it was going to cost them. Yeah. Welcome to the Compliant AF podcast, where healthcare compliance isn't just a checklist, it's a competitive advantage.
I'm Amy Wood, CEO of Copperpenny Consulting, a cybersecurity and HIPAA compliance geek who thinks encryption is awesome.
And I'm Kelley, CEO of Clinical HR, fractional HR business partner and HR nerd who is weirdly passionate about employment policy.
If you're a dental or healthcare leader who's tired of check-the-box compliance and wants to actually understand what the rules are and how to build a practice that doesn't live in fear of audits or lawsuits,
you are in the right place. We are digging into the stuff that keeps practice leaders up at night.
We'll break down the boring, call out the BS, and share real strategies with a little snark and a whole lot of caffeine.
This isn't legal advice. We are not your lawyers.
We are two consultants who have seen way too many practices get in trouble because no one explained the rules in a way that actually made sense or made them care.
But since this is a compliance podcast, the content in this podcast or any associated clips is for informational purposes only and does not constitute legal, financial, medical, tax, or regulatory advice. We are not attorneys. Clinical HR LLC and Copperpenny Consulting LLC are not legal firms, and listening to this podcast does not create a client relationship. Always consult a qualified professional advisor for guidance specific to your situation.
So buckle up, because boring compliance just got compliant AF.
New year, new you, new transitions. That's what we're going to talk about today on the Compliant AF podcast. Kara, you have dealt with transitions in the HR capacity, and how bad did they suck?
Oh, they're a lot of fun, but it really depends on what point they engage me during the transition. I love the ones that give us a little bit of time to get things done right, and they can start off on day one on the right foot, right? I'm sure you feel the same.
Well, and I feel like sometimes they're held back by their contracts that say don't tell anyone. And in some cases, you need to tell certain people, like you need to tell certain vendors that, hey, like when I did IT, it's like, hey, like I need to have that new contract in place with the new owner before we continue. And like, if we don't, I have to pull all my stuff. Like you don't get antivirus or backups. And that is kind of a big deal.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, it also depends on the situation of how the transition is structured. Is this somebody who bought a practice and they've never met the team? Did they know that they were coming into the practice and they've been associating for a couple of months? Are they the long-term associate that's now buying the practice and the team already knows and everybody's cool with it? I have had some on the opposite end where they're really, really great, where they were the associate not planning on buying the practice and the team begged them to buy the practice because they were just such an awesome leader. And it was just the most perfect unicorn transition you can possibly imagine. Those are the ones that are a lot of fun to do, a lot of fun to work with people who are already there and already comfortable. But, as you know, with cybersecurity and HIPAA, sometimes it's the ones that have a little bit of drama that make the best stories. So.
Well, I know it's very overwhelming just in general to buy or sell a business. And I've done both. I've sold a business, I've purchased a business, I've created two ground up. All of it is overwhelming and daunting. So just like the basics of going through that, like figuring out how much is it worth? How am I paying for it? What do I have to do after the fact? That part is exhausting overall. And most people that are in the healthcare space as business owners, their brains aren't wired that way. They're used to being the clinical person. And so understanding what you have to do for the business end of things. Like when I hear the word EBITDA, I'm like, oh, no, thank you. Every time I'm like, I get it. I understand it. My CPA says it's super important, 100% on board. But when I hear that, I'm like, I would rather cut my lawn with a pair of scissors than have to do that.
And look, there are brokers and CPAs and people that doctors know are going to help them through that aspect of it. If they've opted to engage somebody. I always advocate for someone who is seller side specifically. If you're the seller and buyer side specifically, if you're the buyer, not somebody who is in the middle working for both, because you really can't realistically advocate for both. But from the compliance side, that's where I start to see even brokers are not looking at certain things. And even from just a business side, they're not looking at certain things, not from the way that HR looks at it. I know like one of my biggest mistakes that I will see is not engaging HR sooner rather than later. Mm-hmm. Yes, I have worked with the transition that they call me on a Friday afternoon and say, I bought the practice yesterday and I'm going to go meet the team on Monday. What do I need to know? And I'm like, oh, Lord. Well, let's go ahead and pick our battles here and see what we can do realistically and what we need to do pretty high priority and what can wait. There's definitely those transitions that I need to work through, but the ones who give me a little bit of time, at least, a month or two before,
Mhm.
tend to be the ones that turn out better. So like that for me is one of the number one mistakes is they're not engaging the right advisors at the right time.
Yeah.
On the HIPAA cybersecurity side, what's kind of your timeline that you would feel would be best for them to engage you, even if the team doesn't know, even if they're bound by their contract for that?
I would say when they decide they want to sell, even before they get things ready or post anything, it's it's more of a what are the buyers looking for? And it really depends on the buyer because I've seen some really savvy young people like just out of dental school, medical school. They're wanting something that is safe, secure, updated, and it's an interesting transition. Like I see some offices where they will just let everything run into the ground and think, well, the new owner will want their own different management program, and they'll want their own, imaging programs and documentation and communication platforms. Like that's fine, but you can't expect a premium price for that.
Fair.
And then there's some buyers like people that are going to groups. And if that's the case, sometimes those groups don't want certain things in place or they're just going to gut everything. And then there's others where, I've had people contact me and they say, "Hey, I'm looking to sell and they want me to have all this stuff for HIPAA and OSHA and I don't have that." And I'm like, "Well, first of all, why not?" It's not like this is brand new information that you just heard today. But also, there are some savvy buyers out there that they don't want to assume that risk. So, huge case that happened in 2025. Most of us dealt with it, or 24, it was in 24, Change Health. So they had this massive data breach. And really, what happened is they were acquired by United Health Group and they didn't do the full merge into the UHC program and all their systems. And so they weren't as protected. They were the weak point, and the hackers got into that. And the whole large United Health Group had to pay for that because of something that was not thoroughly vetted and planned for in an acquisition.
So it sounds like on the seller side, as soon as possible. What about for a buyer? A buyer who needs to engage you to be their HIPAA and OSHA and cybersecurity expert for their practice that they're going to hopefully own for the next 5, 10, 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
What does that look like? What timeline should they follow to engage you whenever they're looking at buying a practice?
I would say when they decide, hey, this is a practice I'm interested in, and to make sure that they're looking at information accurately. And then I can usually be brought in to look at their existing compliance paperwork and see what needs to be done, if anything. It could also indicate other purchases that need to be made. Like how old is their sterilizer? How old is their other equipment? How old are their computers? That's a very common thing that is not discussed, and it should be.
100%. A lot of that is it's factoring it into the budget. If they've not done things, if they've not done their training that they're supposed to, if they haven't, like you said, purchased new equipment. I see a lot of that on my side as well, and it's budget related, where the broker looks at the due diligence and they say, well, this is what this practice is paying for payroll. And they ask questions like, how much PTO are they getting? Okay, it's this number of hours. They don't ask the other questions. They don't really look at whether or not the seller has been compliant in how they pay people. And for example, I have a practice that was recently acquired and I was working with the buyer and they looked at the payroll. And one of the things that they were missing was the fact that all of the hygienists had been misclassified as 1099 independent contractors when they should have been W-2 employees. Well, this practice was in a state with a mandated sick leave. And we did the math. It was automatically to be able to get them compliant, to get them as W-2 employees and give them what they were supposed to be getting for the state, as well as keeping them current with everybody else. When it comes to things like paid holidays and other benefits there, it was an additional about $20,000 to $25,000 a year that it was going to cost them. Yeah. And they thought that based on what they were told with their assessment for due diligence, they thought they would be taking home an extra like $200,000. And so that was just one of the things that we found. because the seller had not properly classified and nobody was really looking at that side of it. And so from an HR perspective too, it's compliance, but it's also the budget. It's the bottom line. And how much is this practice really going to cost you if they've not been doing it correctly when the seller sells the practice? And I'm advising you to do it correctly and you want to start out on a clean slate and do this the right way, this is what it's going to cost you now. And
Yeah.
I know you and I have seen that over the last 10 plus years we've all been in dentistry.
Yeah. I will also say another thing that I see there is they're not categorizing things in their budget
Mhm.
in terms of just compliance in general. So I mean, I encourage clients all the time. It's like you should have a category in,
The line item. Yep.
yeah, for compliance and then separate it by the different things that you have to do, different consultants that you pay or programs that you pay for or services or whatever it is that you're doing. But like training,
Mhm.
absolutely, for all of our ends, for everything with compliance needs to have training, and you should usually have some kind of program with these people. Like, I do programs because I know that's what people need. You have to do training every year, you have to have paperwork updated, like, there's different things that have to happen on an ongoing basis, and I know that doctors generally don't wanna pay for that.
No, and as a first time practice owner that's still in dental school debt, now they've got practice notes and then possibly a building note if they bought it. It's really hard to say, oh, yes, I want to spend these thousands of dollars. But this is where you have to be aware that there is going to be some burden of compliance and that the out of the box DIY version, while it sounds good on paper because it's cheaper, is not necessarily going to be cheaper in the long run whenever these mistakes get made.
Yeah. Will it hold up? That's
Hmm.
that's the thing, like, this is the reason I've done so many data breaches over the last decade plus now is because they were using some kind of DIY solution and thought they had it covered, or they went to a class at a trade show once a year and they thought that was all they needed to do, and it isn't. It's not enough, and so I get called in when that DIY fails to pass muster and they really need an expert to actually help. And, we're not saying that's the only way to be the only thing to do. It's just it's the right way. Like, I didn't wake up one day and say, "Hey, you know what sounds awesome? Let's charge these clients a whole bunch of money and do all this extra work." Like, do you realize how much work goes into just like a HIPAA risk analysis every year? It's like a 30 plus page document. My left hand cramps up from the Z on the keyboard, like when you're typing unauthorized over and over and over again. like it's I didn't decide it was a great idea to do this. It's because it's the right thing to do to make sure that your patients are safe and
Now, I do
all.
have a question actually on that when it talks about how frequently they're supposed to receive this training. And to me, it looks like what entity is actually providing the training. One of the things that I see time and again with somebody buying a practice is they buy the practice and I ask them, what are you doing for HIPAA training? What are you doing for OSHA training? And they say, well, the seller just did it 3 months ago. And so I don't have to do it right now. And I'm like, I don't think that's entirely correct. What is your perspective on that? Because I have an HR opinion.
So I have two thoughts on this. Okay, so
Okay.
the right answer is every covered entity, i.e., doctor, is responsible for ensuring that everyone on their team, including them, is trained annually. And I want to clarify this because the actual law says periodically. And what that means is we look at the current investigations and the corrective action plans, and every single one of them says annual team training, new employees are trained before they touch a computer that has protected health information. Period. No ifs, ands, or buts. That's the current standard of care. It's just not written in the law because it's a giant pain in the butt to change any laws. Obviously, we see what goes on in DC. Like it moves at the pace of molasses. So that's the official ruling. Now, as far as new owners, I kind of look at it as if you have a new team member come in, period, they're going to come in from their last job or no job at all with bad habits, expectations, and then your reality is entirely different. So it's the same thing as when new ownership is there. New ownership is going to start changing programs and supplies and tools and access and all kinds of things. And that new owner is going to have to set the expectations of what their standard of care is going to be for everything in the practice. I don't know if you feel the same way. We didn't talk about this before.
No, we didn't. I do feel the same way, and I also will add from HR's perspective, I treat every transition as if this is a brand new employee because to you it is. Even if you've worked in the practice for multiple years beforehand as an associate and you know these team members, even if the seller hands you a box of employee paperwork and says, "Oh, they don't need to do I-9s. Here's all of the I-9s. I already have them." No, the seller had them for their entity. The buyer does not have them for their entity. You are a new employer for these individuals. And so you have to treat all new hire paperwork, in my opinion, as if you were hiring them for the first time because you are. And so while those are things you may want to have on hand and that's fine, I still require or request or strongly encourage my clients whenever they have bought a practice to get new I-9s, get new W-4s, get new direct deposit authorizations, get all of those new documents in place because you are effectively hiring somebody as a brand new employee for your entity. Unless this is a transition where you've somehow taken over that particular LLC, that particular entity, or whatever your structure is in that state, that might be a little bit different. I would definitely check with your attorneys and see what your obligations are there. But if you've got a brand new LLC that you are hiring them as new employees, you really should be doing all of these things as if it was somebody coming into your business for the first time.
Yeah. I mean, those people often are, well, just like every business, they're your best asset or your worst liability, depending on who they are, what they're doing, and how everything is laid out.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a question for you. So, one of the biggest things that I see, and again, I'm not HR, but I see this, and it's always a concern, is the new buyer comes in, and I dealt with this myself when I bought a business, and you're supposed to like take on the person that was there. If they had a higher wage than is customary for that job at this point, and if they had a whole bunch of extra benefits and tons of vacation that the new owner, quite frankly, can't or shouldn't offer because it's not a proper expectation. I mean, do you run into this where you've got, an office manager that's been around for 30 years and like their pay is so high that even if they went out on the open market, they would never be able to find a job at that price?
All the time, every time. And sometimes I run into a little bit of the opposite where maybe the seller had health insurance through a spouse and didn't have it for the practice, but the buyer, the new owner, needs to have health insurance through the practice because they don't get it through their spouse or they're unmarried or whatever. And so now they have to add something else and they can't afford to do that while paying the high wages or while paying the additional PTO. And so just like I said, any other new hire, I always recommend having an offer letter, having something that they are agreeing to. This is where it's definitely useful to know these things in advance so that we can work out a strategy for it. I never like team members to feel like they're losing anything. And I use that very intentional language to say that they might end up losing something here or there. We may not be able to afford health insurance because the seller had been on some kind of premium plan that they could afford, that they had a long-term relationship with that broker or whatever. We may not be able to afford certain things, may not be able to do a certain bonus structure, or the 401k is actually usually the one that doesn't transfer always perfectly every single time. And so the buyer may have to wait for a certain period of time to be able to implement something like a 401k. But I don't want the team members to feel like they're losing something. And I don't want it to be in promises made and maybe kept or not kind of fashion. I don't want to say, well, we can't do it now, but we promise we'll put it in sooner without having some kind of a substitute for something. So if there is going to be something like health insurance roll in and we need to maybe pull back a little bit on PTO or look at market value for the wage and assess that properly, there needs to be an explanation for why the benefit is shifting from one to the other. Can you do those things? Absolutely. You're hiring somebody brand new. Now, if your contract with the seller says that you're going to pay them the rate that they're already getting, then you may have to do that. But I have sometimes found that there are things that don't end up in the contract that are little perks that the seller was doing for maybe their favorite assistant. I've seen things like the seller was comping a fuel card for them or paying their parking or tolls or something like that for their commute that was not in the contract, was not in the due diligence. The buyer didn't know anything about it until the assistant came. There was one I've worked with recently too that the assistant was able to take the metal that they're supposed to be getting cash back for. Yes, and they were cashing it in themselves and taking that money home, just pocketing it themselves. And they were told it was okay by the seller. And the buyer's like, wait, hold on, that all that money could pay for like lunches for the team or the bit. I'm like, yeah, it can.
Right.
Like there's little things like that that doesn't shake out until after the paperwork's already signed. And so there's a lot that you really have to have kind of a balancing act with, and you need to know about these things and have a diplomatic way to handle it. And that's one of the things I excel at doing. And I've had to do it for this point since 2012. Um, I
Okay.
also see things like I said, PTO being either astronomical or they're not doing it for one, but they're doing it for somebody else, and they're actually required to do paid sick leave or paid leave for all workers, depending on what state. We have to kind of balance that out and make it feel like, everybody is somehow equal. Like that's an interesting little balancing act. And it's things that you really want to look at beforehand because it's questions that don't get asked. Brokers don't necessarily ask, when does PTO accrue? How does it accrue? They ask, how much do they get? But do we know if it's by the employment year? Is it by the calendar year? What happens whenever the year rolls over? Do they pay out? Do they not? Oftentimes the buyer doesn't find this out until, like, say they bought it in July and now we're getting close to the end of the year and everyone's demanding them pay out the PTO. And they're like, wait, hang on a second. This was never covered. Like, what? Because nobody asks those questions. I do. I actually have a form that I call smooth handoffs because, we work in dentistry. I call it it's a transitions document, and it's to guide a conversation between the buyer and the seller. And I'm happy to put a link to that in the show notes, or if you email me, Kara@clinicalhr.com, I'm happy to send that to you because it asks those questions that nobody's really asking. Brokers aren't asking it, your attorneys aren't asking it, your CPAs aren't asking it. And because I work in the world that I work, where I started working at a dental CPA firm, dealing with M&A and seeing all these transitions, and I now work in HR as an HR business partner for dental practices going through these transitions, dental and healthcare practices. I worked with a few others as well. I see those questions and I know we actually need to get all of this information, preferably before your signature is on that document, because good grief, y'all. Yeah.
The only time that you have any power at all whatsoever with anyone, a vendor, a consultant, anybody, is before you sign the stupid paper. Like, come
And
on.
sometimes that's not even good enough. I had one happen in the last year where the seller said they would pay out the sick leave, and then found out after the contract was signed that they didn't have to per the state. And so they chose not to. And the buyer's like, there's hundreds of hours of sick leave because the seller never, like, again, the seller was not operating legally. The seller never let them take their sick leave. So there was literally hundreds of hours of sick leave that was accrued that the buyer can't afford to pay this out, can't afford to have that in their bank. And the team kind of knew it. And they knew that they weren't going to get what they were told that they were, because they worked for the seller long enough to know this. And so we came up again with a balancing act where they had some, but not the full amount. The buyer could have gone back and held the seller accountable. It was in the contract. However, the seller was the buyer's landlord. So,
Oh, see,
yep,
you've got an ongoing relationship you have to balance there.
yep,
Oh, I mean, it just,
some people suck.
yeah, some people suck. And contract negotiations are difficult because honestly, a lot of people don't understand what's in them and they just sign them blindly. And even when they have attorneys or consultants representing them, they still don't listen. And I've run into this on both sides, buying and selling. Like, it's legal jargon. It's not easy to fully understand, but having someone else like interpret it for you. I mean, you and I, that's our specialty. We can take the geek speak and the legal jargon and like geek
That's
speak on
light bedtime reading.
right. The horrible stuff that's like hard for people to understand and then turn that into, oh, hey, this is what this really means. And, transitions are just hard. They really are. It's not fun. It's so hard. Like, also, one thing that I run into a lot is it's either the seller leaves right away, like, "Hey, here's your new boss. I'm out of here. I'm going to the Caribbean. Bye." Or it's they stick around too long and get in the
Oh,
way of changes that the new owner wants to implement. And
yeah.
then there's the question of, well,
Or
who's
become the problem. I've seen that as well, where like they're the ones that are harassing the team members
yeah.
because they were just creepy people and they should not have ever been a team leader. And yeah, and they stay on and they're the ones literally causing the problems.
Yeah. I did have one last year where just in conversation, they said, I'm having to spend a lot of extra time and money in replacing work that the doctor did in the last couple of years that was substandard. And should I go after them? I'm like, well, I'm not an attorney and I'm definitely not your attorney. And
And that's a dental board compliance question, not an HR and not
yeah,
cybersecurity. Do you get the questions that are not in our purview all the time? What do I
all
do
the
about the
time.
review? Yes.
All the time. I mean, my own dentist is doing a transition right now, acquiring someone who's retiring, and, it's fantastic, and I was just like, "Hey, I've seen this, I've seen this. By the way, I'm not your dental consultant, I'm just your compliance consultant," and but we had, like, a 3-hour conversation, and it was just, "I've seen people do this, and, how would you, do a meet and greet? What would you should I have champagne?" I'm like, "No, no alcohol on premise, but we could do mocktails, that could be fun," and
Call it happy hour and you have food.
right, and I was like, "There's so many things that you can do that aren't the standard fair, I guess." And so it's kind of interesting because, even with clients that I have long time, they'll call me about things that are so not in my wheelhouse.
And some of it's conversations they need to go and talk with their attorney about. And I don't mean the real estate attorney that drafted that contract. I mean like their management side employment attorney. One of the ones that I'll see actually on that note is forgetting to forecast the legal landscape of what's coming up. And those are things that nobody really thinks about until it happens. I had one a couple of years ago for a state that was mandating paid sick leave, and the seller had part-time employees. Everybody was part-time. Everybody was under 28 hours per week. And so when the buyer was looking at purchasing this practice, the seller was talking about how, oh, this is the easiest. It's the cheapest payroll. We're only open these like 2.5, 3 days, whatever it was per week. And you don't have to pay anybody benefits because they're all part-time. Well, that wasn't true because the state had that year, I think they bought the practice in like February or March. The state that year, January that year, had implemented mandated sick leave for everybody. And so now it doesn't matter if they were only working 28 hours. They were all eligible for sick leave. And they just weren't paying attention to like what was coming up. And that has happened with other practices where maybe they bought the practice in September, October, and something changed and now we've got a new law for January and they weren't paying attention to that. Whereas somebody like me, like you, are looking at those types of things ahead of the game and saying these are things that are coming up that you might want to be aware of. So at the very bare minimum, they should be talking to their employment attorney about any kind of future changes that are being debated right now within their legislature or that are definitely on the horizon, because that can change what they are required from a budgetary standpoint as well as a compliance standpoint.
Absolutely. And on that note, there are very specific attorneys, people that specialize in all, just like we deal with in healthcare, you specialize in something. You're not just like, for the most part, people don't do just general. Even if it says you're a general dentist on the door, like you're specializing in airway or sleeping or some kind of appliances or implementing Invisalign or full arches or whatever it is that you're doing.
That's your
I
thing.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, like, you do a little bit of everything. It's like a potluck, I guess. Like, you have all the things, but, like, there's a favorite that you prefer to do, and that's your thing that you're known for. And so with that, we've got that with attorneys too. I mean, like, I deal with HIPAA attorneys. They are specifically for just HIPAA and data breaches. And yes, some of them will do, risk assessments and things like that, but they don't know your practice. They're just doing yes, no questions. Same as DIY. But they're the people that you want to call to get through a data breach when and if something happens.
Indeed. Well, my last point that I would say, or last biggest mistake that I would see, since we're talking about niche specific, is using things that the seller has already utilized, whether it's your OSHA manual, your HIPAA training, your new hire documents, like the new hire onboarding packet. And they say, oh, here, yeah, I've got all this stuff in place. Let me help you out. I'll make it really easy for you. Just use mine. Your employee handbook. Oh, it's fine. We've already got one of those in place. Just use mine. We had an attorney do it 10 years ago or whatever. Just use mine. And I'm like, yes, and I understand the impulse to want to do that. I understand you're paying for a lot of things and they may be factoring that in to the price of the sale, that we have all of this stuff in place. But if that stuff isn't compliant isn't updated, then you're ending up with a huge mess to clean up later, either just time that it's going to take for you to fix all of those things, or issues that you're going to have that you get fined for, or have an audit for, or something else that's going to cost you money. Example of that would be something like I-9s. I just talked with a practice owner recently who bought their practice several years ago, like pre C word, pre-COVID, several years ago. And we were going
What we
through the
call it
handbook
now.
and we were going through the handbook template that I was working from for us to get something updated for this practice. And we get to the section about I-9s, and I ask, and she says she's doing them and she's got the documentation. They're bringing that in when they're supposed to. They're choosing from that form. And I said, okay, I just want to make sure that you're using the correct one, because those do expire. You don't necessarily have to renew it every time they do expire, but you do have to have them fill out the form that was effective at the time that they were hired. Well, she wasn't, because she didn't know that, because she was using an outdated onboarding packet that came with the practice. And it just had that old I-9 form from like 2016 or 17 or something like that, that whenever people were hired after that, they were filling out an expired form. And so now she has to go and do an internal I-9 audit and get everything correct. And it's extra work and extra time. And it's things like that that can really catch them off guard. Handbooks, especially, that's obviously going to be its own thing for sure, because you want to build that for your practice. But even little things like the onboarding packet that we think is no big deal is a big deal, or it can be.
I run into that in HIPAA, of course, where all the paperwork, I mean, I customize everything. And it regardless of if it's through me or whatever freebie someone finds on the internet, they're please don't do that, by the way. It'll and don't leave the old doctor's name on it. But with the transition, oh, I get it all the time. I had
Yeah,
one
so
that was in a dental office, and it was an ophthalmology office that was listed on it. And I was like, one of these things is not like the other. I was very confused. But same practice, actually, they sold and recently decided not to continue with us, which is totally fine. I get it. And they came back to us several months ago and said, "Hey, we're coming back around. We really want to get all this stuff updated, and we need more of these notice of privacy practices forms that you did. And how do we get these, or do we have the template for it?" And we're like, "Well, here's how you get them. Here's the fee for that, and the investment into your practice." And it was, "Oh, it costs money. No, I don't want to do that then." And so they continued to use the same documents that had the old owner's information on it.
One of my favorite, using the seller's story, is actually from an optometry practice. I was working with them. This is probably 10 years ago at this point, and they had bought the practice. They knew they needed to do a handbook. We didn't have time to get it done by day one, and so we were working on it, and they decided to go ahead and use what the seller had in the meantime. And they call me one morning, and they're like, they being the doctor and her spouse, who was going to be the office manager, said, we have an employee issue. Okay, so what's going on? Well, one of our team members came in this morning and her ponytail was on top of her head. I'm like, okay. And they're like, well, the handbook says that it needs to be a low ponytail at the nape of the neck. I'm like, are you asking me if you should discipline a team member for her ponytail being too high? Well, but that's what the handbook says. Okay, and that's why we're changing it. Like, no, no, no.
And speaking of hair, then you've got a lot of states that are now adopting Crown
Crown Act,
Act
yes. Yeah,
laws.
there's a lot of those things that come into play as well. And when you're talking about things like states that are updating, even things like background checks, for example, your state
Yeah.
may have recently implemented something that says that you can't do it at a certain point in the application phase. And so your handbook policy, your applications, all of those things need to be updated to be compliant with that particular state's law at the time that you're actually buying the practice. And so, yes, I would 100% recommend, even if they just recently updated their handbook, it wasn't customized to you and what you want. It's fine if we take a look at it. It's fine and good to know like what the team is getting as far as benefits and kind of how things were administered, if it's even accurate to reflect what the practice was really doing. Because I see a lot of that where our policy says one thing, but we're not really doing that. Okay. And so it's good to have those things on hand for reference. And we also want to make sure that we're customizing something for the new practice owner's practice in a way that does kind of blend what they did culturally with what you have to do from a compliance perspective, and then also what you would like for your practice. It is your practice at this point, and it may take a little while to feel that way. But it is, and I promise you, our government entities that that manage a lot of these things are going to hold you to it from day one. So we may as well treat it that way.
Yeah. And, at the end of the day, it's about making sure that the huge investment that you make into buying a purchase is going to pan out. It might not be right away, but that's your investment, that's your future. And for the sellers, you want to make sure that your team and your patients are taken care of and be okay with letting things be different than what you did.
Absolutely.
Emotionally, I'll be completely honest, like, I sought therapy after I sold my first business because it was my baby. I had done it for 18 years, and I had to be like, "Okay, fly away, little birdie," and it was really hard, and so I tell people that all the time, and after buying a business, same thing, like, the seller was had a hard time, and I made it very clear. I'm like, "I know this is going to happen because it happened to me, and I see it all the time."
Yes.
So,
And then you called me to celebrate and I killed your happy bubble.
oh my god, right? You're like, "Did you think about this? And what about this? And what about that? And what if this person does this?" And I'm like, "Can you just sit here and be nice and say hooray, high five Amy?"
I did. I said, congratulations and talk to your attorney tomorrow.
Yeah, I wanted to. Okay, so when my husband and I talk, we we always, as humans, when we are in any kind of relationship with someone else, we want to help solve a problem when someone comes to us with a complaint or apparently joy and celebration. And we now have a rule in our marriage. It's when a conversation kind of goes off the rails, it's like, "Oh, all right, hold up. We're gonna reevaluate here. Do you want to commiserate? Do you want an atta girl or a I'm so sorry, sweet baby darling? Or do you want a solution?" Because those are two entirely different conversations. I wanted an atta girl from you, but
I
thank
gave
you.
you one.
Yes. With a huge butt.
Was I wrong?
You were not wrong. You just, more of a fun hater than I was that day.
I'm sorry. HR ruins everything. You know this.
Well, HIPAA is usually the roadblock to all the fun new vendors and toys that are out there. So I get it. I can say from personal experience that first year is hard on both sides. And after that, it's easier to just be like, not my circus, not my monkeys. I am no longer in any control of anything that happens on either side, buying or selling. I can't control someone else's feelings, thoughts, or anything surrounding that. But the cool thing is you made a leap of faith and made a change one way or another, buying or selling. It's that what's the phrase I use for Scott? Um, the road of life is paved with a lot of flat squirrels. So just make a decision, right or wrong. Don't be a flat squirrel.
I
That's
love
a
it.
horrible analogy for this topic. I know, but
No, but it's an awesome thing for us to land on here or to end our session on today is don't be a flat squirrel
don't be a
and
flat
make sure you have the right advisors at the right time for the right purpose for your practice going forward. That's how you create successful transitions. It's how you successfully buy or sell a practice is to make sure that you have the right people in place at the right time and that we understand is overwhelming, but are able to kind of take it one step at a time and give yourself that space to do that. It is really hard. It is definitely hard to buy a business, especially if this is your first time. And it's hard to blend, the old with the new and get correct, get things correct when it comes to a compliance standpoint. But those are the things that you do get in trouble for later. So those are the ones that you really need to prioritize, maybe over some other things that you might want to do in the practice. Like I understand it's a lot of fun to go in and paint and redecorate and do all of these things that make it shiny and pretty, but nobody comes to audit you for that.
right.
You pick the wrong paint color, you're not in trouble for that. If you aren't paying people correctly or if you end up with a security breach, those are the problems. And so be compliant, put your priorities in order, make sure you have a successful practice transition.
A compliant AF practice transition.